Okay, let's get started, right? So let me give you a quick overview of what we will do in today's class, right? So yesterday we talked about strategic management, right? So we did a quick overview of what strategic management is, right? So let's get a recap of that and then we'll start our class, right? Okay, now strategic management is basically when a business thinks about how it will achieve its long-term aim and mission, right? So what's a business long-term aim and mission, and how will business achieve that long-term aim and mission? That is what strategic management is, right? And as I said, that strategic management is very important, especially for newly established businesses. Why? Because they're just in the process of setting themselves up, and they need to be very clear with where they want to go and what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it, right? I mean, it's not that strategic management is only done by newer businesses. All businesses do strategic management, but it's even more important for newer businesses which are just setting things up, setting themselves goals, vision, and then trying to achieve those goals. Okay, now this being said, can you see my screen? Okay, now I said strategic management will be divided in three parts: strategic analysis, strategic choice, and strategic implementation, right? So it's just like this. Think about it. It's very simple. Whenever you set yourself an objective, so first thing that you have to do is to analyze where you stand right now. So that is analysis part. So strategic analysis is about using models and identifying where you stand at the moment, right? Then comes in strategic choice. Strategic choice is about choosing the strategy, right? Choosing the strategy which strategy you want to choose to achieve your, intended target. And then comes in the final part, which is the execution part, and that is known as implementation. So you implement that thing, and that is strategic implementation. So how you will implement your strategy and what are different factors that you need to consider in that, right? Those are all part of strategic implementation. Now, we started yesterday, we started discussing some models which are part of strategic analysis, right? So strategic analysis, again, is using models and tools to identify where a business stands in relation to its competitors. So in relation to the market dynamics, in relation to the competitive environment, where do we stand right now? So if I have to give you a very simple example, Mega Lecture is an online teaching platform, and there are a couple of other teaching platforms in Pakistan. If we just talk about Pakistani market at the moment, then we need to see what are we offering, what are they offering, what are our competencies, what are their competencies, and things like that. Easy? Okay, now this being said, so the first thing that we'll talk about here is SWOT analysis. What is SWOT analysis? We did talk about this yesterday as well. So SWOT analysis is about identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So all you have to do is to just make a simple table sort of a thing, right? Where a business will start off with identifying its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? So you divide a blank page like this, right, in 4 quadrants, right? And then each quadrant has something written, right? So first comes in the strengths of the business, right? So what are business strengths, right? What are its strong areas, right? Then comes in business weaknesses. Again, as I said, that both weaknesses and strengths of a business are coming from within itself, right? So these are not external. In fact, they're internal to a business, right? What are business strengths? What are business weaknesses? Then comes in opportunities, right? Opportunities are in the external environment that shows like what opportunities this business can tap on, right? And how it can improve its situation, how it can maximize its return, how it can, maximize its profits. And then at the same time, there are not only opportunities in the markets, there are also threats, right? From your competitors, from other things that are happening in the environment and all these things, right? So these are the 4 things that you identify in SWOT analysis, right? So this being said, yesterday, if you remember, we did a SWOT analysis for a real company, Oppo, where we said that the strength of this business could be Oppo is a cell phone manufacturing company, and they are relatively new in the market compared to other brands and all that, right? But what is their one major strength? So one major strength of Oppo is that they are relatively cheap, quite cheap, I would say, right? In comparison to Samsung, in comparison to Apple and all these, right? So that is their strength. However, their weakness could be less durability, right? So their brand is not, their phones are not as durable as other substitute products, and therefore some customers might have concerns and reservations about buying Oppo, given the fact that they might not consider Oppo to be good value for money, right? So they might say that these phones are not very durable, and therefore they're not good value for money, right? Okay. Now, this being said, what about opportunities and threats? So one opportunity that we could think about was, there are a lot of emerging markets where average income levels are not very high, like Pakistan and other countries, Asian countries as well. So there, people are looking for cheaper options. There, people are looking for cheaper cell phones, and Oppo really has a market to it, right? So there's need for cheaper phones in emerging markets where people incomes are relatively low. So Oppo can tap on those opportunities. But at the same time, there are some threats, like bigger brands have more marketing budget, right? Bigger brands have huge marketing budget, which means that they can advertise their products much more than Oppo. They can give more discounts, loyalty cards, I don't know, other promotional things, tactics they can use to take the market away from Oppo and things like that, right? So these are some threats. And we also said that bigger businesses have low cost of production, right? So they benefit from economies of scale, with smaller brands like Oppo, because they're producing on a smaller scale, do not benefit from, right? So this is one possible way of doing SWOT analysis. Like, this is the way of doing SWOT analysis. All you have to do, if you are doing it for some other business, you just need to think about what situation is that business working in. And then I also mentioned yesterday that for our A2 now business exam, which is paper 3, where there's only one exam component for A2 business, and that is paper 3. In that, there is a long case study, and that is related to just one specific business, right? So you have to answer all of your questions in relation to the information provided in the case study, right? So that is what it is. So if you are doing SWOT analysis in your exam, then you need to be very mindful and careful about what strengths of the business mentioned in the case study, what strengths it has, what weaknesses you can see, what opportunities you can see, and what threats you can see, right? Okay, so that was the first model of strategic analysis, first model of strategic analysis that we did, right? So if you want me to number it, we can do that, right? Then the second model we talked about was PEST analysis. What is PEST? PEST stands for political, economic, social, and technological, right? Now, PEST analysis says that a business should be mindful of its external environment. The business should be mindful of its external environment, right? Okay, so what about the political environment that could be of concern to the business? So one thing that could be of concern to the business is how the political environment is changing, right? So with change of government policies change, right? Some governments are more pro businesses meaning that they're really interested in giving businesses, discounts, not discounts, sorry, tax holidays, reducing the corporation taxes, trying to facilitate businesses. Some governments are more inclined towards making policies that are business friendly, which create more favorable environment for businesses to thrive in. Whereas on the other hand, some governments are more inclined towards charging higher taxes to corporations, and trying to maximize the tax revenue that corporations pay and things like that, right? So I mean, these political scenarios always affect businesses. Then similarly, how good political ties or diplomatic ties or economic ties a country has with other countries will determine whether the local businesses will have more opportunities to export or less opportunities to export, and things like that, right? So this political environment in an economy is constantly changing, and that affects performance of businesses, right? So that's another thing, right? Then coming to the economic factor, we talked about that economic policies directly affect businesses. 3 major macroeconomic policies include fiscal, monetary, and supply side policies, right? Fiscal policy, we did talk about it. It's about government taxation and spending, right? So either you can have expansionary policy or contractionary policy. So we can do a quick recap, right? So for fiscal policy, I said there are 2 things that you are looking at in fiscal policy, which is the government taxation, right? So that is how much taxation a government would charge and the other thing is government spending, right? So these are the two things. And then within fiscal policy, there are two possible options available to a government. Either you can have more expansionary policy or you can have contractionary policy, right? Now, expansionary, as the word suggests, is about expanding the size of the economy. And how do we expand? How the government expands the size of an economy? By reducing taxes, right? So that people have more disposable income and they spend more, and by increasing government spending, right? So it gives a boost in the economy, economic activity increases, and as the result, there's more national income, higher GDP, and people on average are earning more, they have more spending power and things like that, right? So obviously expansionary policy is more beneficial for businesses, right? Their taxes would be low, corporation taxes, which are imposed on profits of businesses, those will be lower, and businesses will really thrive, expand, and prosper in such a situation, right? On the contrary, there is another option within fiscal policy, that is contractionary, right? Now, this is doing something very opposite to what happens in expansionary. In contractionary, the government is, increasing taxes, it's reducing government spending, right? Why? Because government wants to collect more taxes, and with those taxes, government might has its own plan, like might have its own plan of spending more on infrastructure or perhaps education and healthcare and things like that, right? So that's all about fiscal policy. Then comes in monetary policy, and we are not going in a lot of detail, knowing the fact that you are an economics student and you know what all these policies are. Monetary policy is about interest rates and money supply. So again, just like fiscal policy, in monetary policy as well, there could be two possible policy options, either expansionary or contractionary. Expansionary is when interest rates are lower, which means it's cheaper for businesses to borrow, and they borrow more and they expand more, they invest more in their technology, they expand their businesses. And contractionary is the opposite, where interest rates are higher and therefore businesses are reluctant to borrow, given the fact that borrowing is expensive, and therefore that will mean lower spending and lower investment by businesses during contractionary monetary policy. In expansionary, they invest more, they expand their businesses and all. Got it? Okay. And then the third and the last was supply side policies, which are about enhancing a country's production potential, right? Now, what do we mean when we say supply side policies? So these policies are targeted at aggregate supply. So they help boost production or supply of an economy. How? By facilitating businesses. How do they do that? So they basically provide subsidies. That could be one simple way, or one simple way of implementing supply side policies. But there are a couple other ways to go about it, which includes like facilitating businesses, giving them tax holidays, or giving them tax holidays, building infrastructure in a country which supports businesses, which includes roads, telecommunication networks, and things like that, right? So these are all supply side policies. And then also another thing, which is investment in human capital. Investment in human capital is another very important supply side policies, because as your labor becomes more trained, more educated, only then it will be able to produce more. And China, and a big reason for China's and India's massive growth is the fact that they have a lot of educated, productive, and cheap labor, right? So we do know that. Okay, is this making sense? Okay, very nice. Now, this being said, so this was about economic factors that affect a business, right? Then moving forward from here, just a second, right? Okay. We said that PEST analysis, P is political, E is economic, S is social, and T is technological. So what social factors affect businesses? I mean, there are always social changes taking place in an economy, right? And they affect how they affect how consumers and individuals behave and think, right? Now, with all the technology and all the apps and all of these different things, people are more likely to order things home rather than going to stores and going to departmental stores to buy something, right? That's just one example of how social change has affected people. Then, I mean, unlike older times where people used to sit together late at night or in the evening to watch a television, I mean, which used to happen, I guess, back in 90s. I mean, that's no more a thing, right? So the TV commercials do not get you as much outreach. The billboards do not get businesses as much outreach, as much social media presence does, as much digital or, yeah, internet presence does. That's why we see that all these businesses have their pages and presence on these different social media platforms like Facebook, I don't know, Instagram, and all these other things, Snapchat, blah blah blah. I don't know if that is correct or not, right? But you are getting my point. Now similarly, excuse me, similarly for the technological changes, I mean, technology is changing everything that we do, right? From as simple as how we buy things to as much as how we learn, how we do business, how we interact with people, and all these different things. So businesses need to be mindful of how these things are changing, right? And how they can adopt themselves. So one small example could be, right? So before COVID, I mean, there were online teaching platforms and everything, but no one really thought, I mean, a lot of people didn't think about that, online learning could be one thing, could be a permanent thing, and so on and so forth, or working from home can be possibility. But after COVID, since there was no other options, since there was no other possibility, so they had to switch and transition from working to home and, using all the technology that was needed for that matter, right? So businesses should be adaptable and flexible to incorporate these changes so that they can better serve their customers. Are you getting me, right? So I did give you this example. So think of a departmental store which previously used to sell just like the normal way businesses sell, that customers walk into your store, you sell them the product and things like that. But what if now businesses want to order products at home? So then this departmental store need to get on board with an app, right? Where people are sitting at home, they're ordering through the app, but whose products are being sold? This departmental store's products are being sold. Someone comes in, collects the order for on behalf of the customer, and they get the payment and things like that, right? So businesses have to be adaptable and flexible. Okay. Now, then we talked about Boston Matrix. What is Boston Matrix? Boston Matrix is about product portfolio. It is to analyze, Boston Matrix is about a business product analysis to categorize its products and identify good performing products from poorly performing products, right? Now, what you do in this, right? I'll tell you. So what you do in this is that you make a 2x2 matrix, right? You make a 2x2 matrix, and on one axis you have market share, and on the other axis you have, think about this. So let's say this, right, on this horizontal axis, you have market share, and on the vertical axis you have on the vertical axis you have just a second, I'm trying to write table, right? You have on over here, let's put it down like this, right? You should have market growth, right? Right. Okay, let me draw it over here. It's always tricky to, navigate your options in the word. Okay, now think about this. So for the Boston matrix, the way is it's a 2x2 matrix, right? It's a 2x2 matrix, right? Just a second, right? And then you have it's a 2x2 matrix, right? And then you have like this and like this. Okay, now on one axis, I was telling you on one axis, right? Have a look at this. So let's say on the, this is the horizontal axis, right? So on the horizontal axis, you have market share, right? And on the vertical axis, you will have market growth. I mean, it doesn't really make any difference if you change the order as long as you are identifying the products correctly, right? I'll show you what do I mean when I say identifying the products correctly, right? So on the horizontal axis, you have market share. On one side, it will be low, right? Low market share, right? On the left, let's say it's low market share. On the right, you have high market share, right? And similarly, on the vertical axis, you have market growth, right? And market growth. And again, just like market share, on one side you will have low market growth, on the other side you will have high market growth. Preet, is everything making sense so far, right? Okay, now think about this. What is Boston Matrix? Boston Matrix is the analysis of a company's products or a company brands, right? Now, before we jump to this, let's talk about what do we mean when we say company's products, right? Because company is what? Company is, one corporation, one business that might be running different products and different brands. Now, what is a product? Now, if you just think about Procter and Gamble, right? I mean, they produce different type of soaps, they produce different types of shampoos. Similarly, if you think about Tata group of companies, right? So Tata is doing a couple of different things, producing cars. It's doing a lot of other things, not really sure, right? Samsung, if you think of Samsung, they're producing cell phones, they're producing LED screens, they're producing so many different things, right? So all these different products are their brands or different products, right? Now, think about this. Boston Matrix will classify these products of a company in different categories. And why is this important, or how is this tool useful? We'll look into it in a bit, right? So first thing that you need to know, you should be absolutely clear on the definition of market share and market growth, right? The market share is, simply speaking, market share is percentage of market sales that's captured by one business, right? So market share of a company or as of a business is calculated as percentage, business sales, right? Like in terms of dollar value, right? How much business sales are being made during 1 year, during certain time period, and what was the total sale of that product in the market. So business sales divided by market sales into 100, right? So that will give you a percentage, right? So if, let's say, for any company, the market share turns out to be 30%, right? So let's say if Apple's market share in China is 30%, that means that out of all the customers who buy phones, 30% on average, 30% customers on average buy Apple phones, right? So out of the total sale of cell phones in China, 30% of those sales are going to Apple brands, Apple phones, right? Now, moving on to the second thing that's there in the Boston Matrix is market growth. So market growth is basically a measure of how fast the market is growing, right? A percentage value that shows that compared to last period or compared to last year, how much is the increase in the number of customers in this period. A percentage increase, percentage number showing increase, percentage number showing increase, showing increase in the product sale compared to previous period. Now, this previous period could be 1 month, right? It could be 6 months, it could be 1 year, but normally, as you would know, we calculate these statistics on yearly basis compared to previous period, right? Previous period, like last year, right? Okay, is this clear, Preet? Okay, now what is market growth? Market growth is a number, it's a percentage that will show that compared to last year, how much is the increase in the sale of the product, right? So you can take example of any product, right? So if we were discussing the example of a cell phone market, right? So if 15% is the market growth in cell phones, right, then that means that compared to last year, 15% more customers bought cell phones this year in this country compared to what they did last year, right? So that is what market growth is, right? And is market growth beneficial for a business? The simple answer is yes. Why? Because obviously, if market is growing, that then it means that there will be more sale for the business as well. And I mean, it's just like saying that if online tutoring is becoming more common in Pakistan or otherwise in the world generally, right, then will Mega Lecture benefit out of it? The idea is yes, obviously, right? Because then we can expect more customers, and through more customers, we can expect more revenue and so on. Okay, now all the different products of of a business are divided in four categories, right? So the first one, have a look at this. So this first quadrant, right? Let's label it like this: first quadrant, second quadrant, third quadrant, and fourth quadrant, right? So for the first quadrant, market share is low, market growth is low, right? I did tell you that this is known as dog, right? So this product is known as dog because neither the market is growing a lot nor the market share of your product is or your brand is high, right? Then the second quadrant, market share is high, market growth is low. So share is high. I mean, you have a popular brand, so market share is high, but growth, it's not growing a lot, right? So that's known as cash cow. I know what's cash cow, like that's generating a lot of cash or money for you, cash cow. Then in the third quadrant, market share is low, but market growth is high, right? Market share is low, like your product has, share in the market, but otherwise the market is going fast. So this is known as question mark, right? So you can't really predict how this product will perform in the future. Question mark, right? And then the fourth and the last one is where the market share is high, the market growth is also high. So that is known as star, because I mean both prospects are both on both dimensions. The product is doing fine, share is also high, your product is doing great, and the market is also generally growing a lot, right? So that's a start. Easy, we got on this, right? Okay, now coming to the idea that after analyzing this, after categorizing your products in these different categories, how will this add value to the decision making? How will this benefit a business in terms of better decision making? And the simple answer to that is that, think about this. If market share is low, right? So let's talk about the dog first, right? So if your market share is low, then I mean, you market share is low and market growth is also low, then you don't have much prospects for this product, right? So it shouldn't be a problem even if you drop it altogether, right? So let me give you a simple example. So let's say Mega Lecture starts offering classes for, junior classes, junior grades, like 3 class, fourth grade, fifth grade, and so on, right? And what we realize that our market share is really low because the market is already captured by other players in the market, and the market is also not growing a lot, right? Not a lot of younger kids take online classes. That is what it means, that the market is not growing, right? And we are also not doing great in that. So it would be better for Mega Lecture to drop that service altogether, right? Because it's not generating much revenue, and we might be spending a lot of time and energy in producing those classes which are not generating much revenue for us. So how about we just drop it altogether, right? Are you getting me? So it's better for a business to drop, end its dog, right? Is this making sense, please? Okay. Now coming to the cash cow, right? So market share is high, market growth is low. So even though the market is not growing that much, but your share in the market is high. So if I think of O and A level students, right? So for Mega Lecture, O and A level students, the market might not be growing a lot in Pakistan because most people, let's say in Pakistan, prefer to take local boards, right? It's not a local board, it's a Cambridge board, you would know, right? So the market growth is low, right? For O and A levels, there are not many students taking O and A levels in Pakistan, but our share of the market is high, right? So, I mean, Mega Lecture is relatively well known for O and A levels classes. So perhaps we should continue with it, right? No, not perhaps. In fact, we should continue with these classes because they are generating the most revenue for the business, right? So that's what it is. And this cash cow could be used where, I'll tell you, right? Now think about this. Question mark is market share is low. Our product is not doing that well, but market is growing well. Market is growing fast for this product, our share of the market is low, then it means that we are doing something wrong. Our product has some deficiencies which need to be addressed. Preet, do you agree with me? Our product has some deficiencies that need to be addressed, right? Now think about this. Otherwise the market is growing a lot, but we could not capture a big chunk of that. So perhaps our service or our product is not as good as our competitors' product. So that is what we should try to identify, right? So let's say we start local boards classes, right, at Mega Lecture, and then we see that the market is growing because, as I just said, that a lot of students in Pakistan take local boards, right? So market is growing fast, given every year there are more students in our country who take exams for local boards, right? Grade 10th and grade 11 and whatever, right? But we are unable to capture a big share of the market. Then we are doing something wrong, which we should identify, and then we should improve on that. And here is where the cash cow comes into play, right? So we can perhaps market our product more. We can try to get better quality teachers. We can try to do some marketing and advertisements to support our question mark, right? Okay, and then the fourth and the last of all is where the market share is high, right? Market share is high, market growth is high, and that is star, right? So for star, I mean, we are pretty good because we have captured a big chunk of the market, and our market growth is also high, right? And there's nothing we need to do. We just need to sustain this over longer time, right? We just need to sustain this over longer time and yeah, continue with that, right? So the best product that we have, that is what star is, right? Okay, this is making sense. So this is how Boston Metrics helps businesses. This is how Boston Metrics helps businesses to better decide how to improve their products and all that. Okay, now moving forward, today we'll talk about just a second. Okay, so we have done SWOT analysis, we have done pest analysis, we have done Boston Metrics. Now we'll do two more: Fortify Forces and core competencies, right? Fortify Forces and core competencies. Okay, now have a look at this. Let's first do Fortify Forces. Now, what is this model called Fortify Forces? So Fortify Forces is a model that tells a business that what is the level of competition in the market, right? Let me tell you. Analyze of competition in its market, right? A model that helps a business analyze the level of competition this in its market. Okay, now think about this. So we are an online teaching platform, mega lecture, right? Now, if you want to do Fortify Forces analysis, right? So what we will be looking at basically is that how much is the competition in this online teaching market, right? Now, what we do for Fortify Forces, let me quickly show you here on this whiteboard, right? So what we basically do is that we identify four factors, right? So think about this: bargaining power. Let me first write all these four down. Bargaining power of buyers, right? Now, what exactly we mean when we say bargaining power of buyers, I'll tell you, right? Bargaining power of buyers, like your customers who buy your products, right? Then you have on the other side, you have bargaining power of suppliers who are supplying you something. Bargaining power of suppliers, right? So if it's a manufacturing business, then it's fairly simple to identify who are the suppliers, because they are providing you with the raw material and things like that, right? Then you have two more factors: number of threat from substitute goods, right? Threat from substitute goods. And the last of all is threat of new entrants, right? Okay, now think about this. When we look at these four factors, what a business is able to identify is that how much is the competitive rivalry, new entrants, right? So when business is able to identify these four factors, what it can see is that how much is the competitive rivalry, right? At the middle of these four factors is competitive rivalry, right? Now think about this. Competitive rivalry. Okay. The idea is fairly simple. If we take example of a real business, right? Let's say Samsung, right? Okay, let's think about Samsung now. If the bargaining power of buyers is more, when do you expect the bargaining power of buyers to be higher, right? So who are their buyers? Consumers or customers who buy their cell phones, right? Now, if they have a lot of substitutes in the market, now this is kind of linked to the available substitutes, right? So we have seen that recently there has been increase in the number of cell phone producing companies, right? So there is Oppo, is there is Huawei, and some new brands, cell phone producing brands have entered the market, right? So Samsung bargaining power against buyers has decreased. Why? Because they know that if Samsung is producing a cheaper brand or a cheaper product, then they can switch to relatively less cheaper brands. This is making sense, right? So bargaining power of Samsung has reduced due to okay. Okay. Yeah. Sure. No problem. Okay. Now, Portify Forces, have a look at this. Right? So Portify Forces is about, right, a model that helps a business analyze the level of competition that exists in the market, right? The level of competition that exists in the market. Okay. Now, when would competition be higher, right, in the market? When these four factors, we'll consider these four factors to identify whether the competition in the market is more or less. Right now, what four factors we're looking at? Bargaining power of buyers. How much is the bargaining power of company buyers? How much is the bargaining power of its suppliers? What is the threat of substitute goods? And what's the threat of new entrants? Right? Okay. Now have a look at this. And these four factors together determine the competitive rivalry, right? Competitive rivalry that exists in the market. Okay. Now, if bargaining power of buyers is higher, when will the bargaining power of buyers be higher, right? When there are more substitutes available for the product, right? So I was giving you example of Samsung, and Samsung is an old, well-established, right? Exactly. So Samsung is old, well-established brands producing cell phones and other things. But if you look at the cell phone market recently, there has been increase in the number of firms that produce cell phones. Oppo is an example, Huawei is an example, and so on, right? There might be some local brands, other local brands in different countries, which I might not be aware of, right? Now, that means if Samsung phones are getting more expensive, the buyers will switch to substitutes, right? Or competitors' products. So more the bargaining power of buyers, the more the substitutes there are in the market, right? Now, similarly, when is the bargaining power of suppliers more? When there are limited options available to a business. Now, think about this. If Samsung is buying all of its raw material from one supplier, right? Monopoly, exactly, excellent, right? So when the supplier has a monopoly in the market, right? So it's either only company that provides that raw material, or it's one of the few companies that provide that raw material, right? Then it knows that no matter what, Samsung will continue buying the raw material from them, right? So whatever raw material is used in a cell phone, like the microprocessors, I don't know, the plastic that is being used, and the other electronic devices that are used in a smartphone. So who is providing Samsung those products, right? So if that supplier knows, when will that supplier has more bargaining power? When there are limited number of suppliers providing those products. Yes or no? Then also brands like Apple charge very high price. Exactly. Bargaining power is high. Absolutely correct, right? Similarly, two more factors that a business needs to consider: that what are the threats from substitute goods, right? So are the substitute goods equally good, or is there something that's better in your brand, and therefore you should not be that much worried about the substitute products, right? So if the substitute goods are equally good, right, then let's say Samsung has no special unique selling point, and so on, right? It doesn't has any unique features in smartphone, like, I don't know, the quality of the camera, or perhaps the speed of the processor, and so on and so forth, right? Then it will be more afraid of the substitute products like Apple and other brands, because Samsung is not that better when it comes to substitute goods. But if Samsung has some unique selling points and so on, right, then Samsung knows that it has its own uniqueness in its product, and consumers will still continue to buy their brand, right? And then comes in threat of new entrants. Now this is important. Now if you kind of relate this to the concept that we studied in economics, right, entry barriers, right? Now, if it's a market where it's difficult for new entrants to enter, right? So if it's a market where entry barriers are high, making it difficult for the new players to enter the market, then I mean, that's good for the business. But if otherwise the entry barriers are low, it's easier for the new brands to enter, then, again, that would be a problem for the business, right? Now, based on these four factors, collectively determine the competitive environment, right? For business, right? Now, if we just quickly Google this and we look at what this is, right? I think, can you see my screen? So this is the simple bargaining power suppliers. Let me open a better one, right? Bargaining power, Fortify Forces, right? Have a look at this. So rivalry among is existing competitors, right? So threat of new entrants, threat of substitute products or services, bargaining power of suppliers, bargaining power of buyers, right? Now, what a business needs to do and how is this model helpful? So what a business needs to do is to try to reduce the threats. Obviously, that kind of makes sense, right? So what can it do? So let's say, first of all, threat of substitute goods. So what it can do is that it can create more unique features in its products, which competitors cannot replicate, which competitors cannot copy, right? Therefore, and then hence, business will be in a safer position. It knows that, its products are unique and better than its competitors and so on, right? Similarly, in the case of threats of new entrants, what a business can do is to, again, create some more can create some entry barriers for the new firms, right? So I was giving you this example that well-established brands have one major advantage over newly established businesses, and that is their reputation, their brand image, their brand recognition, right? Now, with all these things also act as entry barriers in the market, right? So when someone knows that, the existing online teaching platforms are doing already great, and it will be difficult for a new platform or a new business to set up in this market, then new startups or new businesses will be afraid to do that, knowing the fact that existing businesses are really nice and really good, so they can't compete with them, right? So that's one way of going around this, right? Similarly, as far as bargaining power of buyers is concerned, what the business can perhaps do is to try to, diversify its products, not stay dependent on one or two goods, but diversify. That's why all bigger businesses have multiple products. In case one product is not doing good, then they can switch to another product and so on and so forth, right? And similarly, for the suppliers, how they can reduce the threat of suppliers is by having multiple suppliers on board, right? So not relying on the supply of one supplier, but instead, getting more suppliers on board in case one supplier starts charging them higher prices, or, the quality of the goods provided by that supplier are not that good, then the business can switch to, substitute options. Right? We good on this? Okay. Now that was about Portify Forces, right? So if I have to quickly write this down, right? Yes. Position by say gaining sing barriers using right? So this is how a business uses Fortify Forces to, make better decisions, right? Right. These are four forces. Exactly. These are four forces. Exactly. So this is something that I've always asked, right? So the fifth one is the rivalry amongst existing competitors. Can you see my screen? Which is coming from these four factors, basically. right? So that is what I've always wondered, that why is this called Portify Forces when there are four factors affecting it? But when these four factors are combined together, then they determine the overall competitiveness of the market, right? When they determine the overall competitiveness of the market. Is it making sense? Great. Okay. Now the next we have is core competence, right? Core competence, right? Now what happens in this core competence, right? And this model is called, let me, right? Preheld and Hammel's, right? Core competence model. Now what happens in this case is that what a business identifies, right? That what are its core competencies, right? And what new competencies it needs to develop and with regards to the market, right? So let me show you here on the whiteboard first, and then we'll discuss, right? Now, core competence. Now, first, let's discuss what the word core competence means, right? So if I say mega lectures core competence is teaching O and A level students, right? Right, so that means that we are really good at teaching O and A level students. Why? Because most of our teachers have already have themselves taken O and A levels exams and they scored really well, and then they have a couple of years of teaching experience. They have also taught in other schools, academies before they joined mega lecture and all these different things, right? So that is our core competence, right? Now in the case of Hamel and, right, so in the case of this model, right, so these are the, you know, these are the people who developed this model, Hamel and Prehelt, right? I don't know how to exactly pronounce this, right? But that's right. That's the name, Hamel and Prehelt, core competence model, right? Now, what we will look at in this case, right? Core competence model. So what we'll look at in this case is basically that what are, have a look at this. What are the business competence with regards to its markets, right? So have a look at this. Just a second, let me go at first, right? So again, just like we were looking at the 2x2 matrix, right? Okay, now on one side you have competence, right? So let's say we have on the horizontal axis, this is horizontal, right? So you have competence, and on the vertical axis, this is vertical, right? On the vertical axis, you have the market. Now, either it could be a new market or an existing market, and similarly, whether either it could be a new competence, or an existing competence, right? Is it making sense? Okay. Now I'll tell you how is this model helpful for a business in its decision making, right? Existing. Okay. Now, if it's a new competence and it's a new market, right? If it's a new competence and new market, now think about this. It's kind of the most risky strategy. It's kind of most risky strategy, right? Why so? Because you have to develop a new competence in a new market. Now, let me ask you. Let me give you an example, right? So let's say, what would be a good example, right? So Tata, right? So Tata thinks of launching their car brand in China, right? Which is a new market for them. They haven't, operated in that market before, and even and on top of that, rather than selling the same products that they produce, selling the same cars that they produce in India, they're thinking of producing hybrid cars. I repeat, right? So Tata, let's say, I don't know if that competence existing, but market is new. Okay, let me give you an example, right? So think about Samsung. So let's say Samsung was never operational in a market like, so competence, you said competence is existing, the market is new, right? Let me read your question again. The competence is existing, right? But the market is new. If something exists in market, then only someone can provide it. No, market. So think about this. What's your understanding of the market, please? So market means a new geographical area, right? So most of the times we're thinking of the market as a country, right? right? So we are thinking of it as a country, right? So if that's why I gave you the example of, let's say, right. So I'll give you, just stay with me and I'll tell you exactly what I mean, right? Now, core competence, new, existing, market, new, existing. Now, this quadrant, right, where the competence is new and the market is new, right? So think about this. What could be a good example, right? Let's take another example. Okay, think of Tesla, right? Now, Tesla is thinking of, like, Tesla is more known for its hybrid cars, right? Or electric cars, basically, right? Now, Tesla thinks of entering a new market, let's say UK market or German market for cars. And they're also not relying on their existing competence. They're trying to develop a new competence, which is, sports cars. Now, sports cars is not Tesla's competence, right? So they are, obviously their competence is electric cars. So they're not only going in the new market, which is UK, which in the market where they have never existed before, right? And they're also trying to develop a new competence, which is sports cars, which they have never done before, right? So that's the most risky strategy, right? It can pay off well, but obviously it's kind of risky, right? Because I mean, there is competition in UK market already, and then you're trying to develop a new competence which you never had before, right? So it can be a difficult and risky situation to be in. Okay, now think about this. This quadrant shows this one I'm talking about, right? So market is existing, but the competence is new, right? So Tesla is thinking of making sports car in USA, right? So I mean, competence is new. Sports car is something that they haven't produced before, but they do know what the market is about, because Tesla is obviously, Tesla's home country is USA. They are already familiar with the market and all that, right? So they know the market dynamics and all these things, but they have never produced sports cars before. So competence is new, but the market is existing, right? So it's not as risky as this one was. So this is not as risky. Obviously, sports cars, or designing SUVs. You know what SUVs are, right? So bigger cars, right? Four wheels or trucks or whatever, right? Some different variant of the car, right? So they're developing a different variant of the car, but the market is existing. So at least they do have knowledge and information about the market. Then comes in existing competence and new market. Existing competence, right, and new market, right? So think about this. Tesla just going to UK, right? Tesla just going to UK, or Tesla just launching their cars in Germany, Tesla just launching their cars in, let's say, Mexico, India, China, blah blah blah, right? Now, in this case, I mean, it's not very risky, because I mean, Tesla is producing the same electric cars that it always has. But since they're entering a new market, so they don't really know what are the dynamics in India's market, right? Whether people want expensive cars, luxury cars, whether normally people prefer more affordable cars, economic, fuel efficient cars, or what, right? So they need to understand the market first. Similarly, they're not very familiar. Tesla would not be very familiar with the German market, right? So electric cars is fine. They have always made those cars, but they don't know the Germany market dynamics, or the UK or the India market dynamics, right? Are we good on this? Right. I'm just rejoin it quickly. Rejoin it.